Greetings, friends, and welcome to this special edition of Conversations in Focus. I am Pastor Brian Hudson from New Covenant Church. Today we're going to be speaking with Reverend Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks and also speaking with Dr. Gwendolyn Kelley. Our topic is addressing the Indiana legislature and this current session in which many issues are being decided, in particular issues surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion, advocating for people, protecting people, doing what's right by people, government serving people appropriately and properly. As we know, we're in the middle of a new administration nationally and also in our state, and we're seeing a lot of disturbing trends, a lot of self-service, and frankly, a lot of policies injurious to people and counterproductive to progress as a civil society. Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks is the senior pastor at First Baptist Church, North Indianapolis. He's also the founding president of the Africological Institute. He's also a president of the Indiana Ministerium. And these are all coalitions and organizations that advocate for people. Dr. Hicks describes his work as being vanguards for the causes of widows and children. When matters arise at the State House that cause vulnerability, for those who can easily fight for themselves, we take on those issues. Dr. Gwendolyn Kelley is a senior executive consultant for the Children's Policy and Law Initiative, which we call CPLI. She's also a board member. Dr. Kelley is the state education chair for the NAACP. She's also on the Social Justice Committee for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and for the National Council on Negro Women. She's also a team member with Dr. Hicks on the Africological Institute. This conversation was recorded on March 21st and is very pertinent as our legislature is in the second half of their session. And I appreciate the work of Dr. Hicks and Dr. Kelley and many others who are advocating on the behalf of people who really can't advocate for themselves. And I'm happy to learn that they have been instrumental in defeating some initiatives that would have been injurious to people. I want you to enjoy this conversation, be educated by it, be inspired by it, and do what you can to advocate on behalf of those who don't have a voice at the legislature. Throughout this conversation, I encourage you to follow the web links and QR codes that you'll see on the screen. We are still a democracy the last time I checked, which means your voice and your engagement is essential. Let's go now to our conversation with Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks and Dr. Gwendolyn Kelley. We want to look at some topics that are important on this day, March 21st. We're into the second half of the legislative session for our state of Indiana, in which Dr. Hicks and Dr. Kelley have been involved, and with others in advocating for those who don't have a voice, for those who rely on Medicaid, for those who rely on public education, for those of us who believe in the virtue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those are all matters before our lawmakers. So I want to begin with Dr. Hicks, first of all, to ask you about Senate Bill 2. I received an email from you back last weekend, and there was some hearing going on. What's the outcome of that Senate bill? First of all, what is Senate Bill number 2? And what was the outcome of that?
Well, thank you, Pastor Hudson, once again for allowing us to be here to talk a little bit about that which is taking place at the State House. Senate Bill 2, as you indicated, is a bill that is of great concern. Dr. Kelley and I have been working very hard through the Africological Institute on Medicaid for about a year and a half now. And so when Senate Bill 2 came up, it was of great concern because it's called Medicaid Matters. Even before we get to Senate Bill 2, we have to understand that before the legislative session happened, we have a new governor, Governor Braun, that decided that his first executive order would be to dismantle DEI, and his second executive order was to stop advertising for Medicaid. Apparently, he is in tandem with those that brought to us Senate Bill number 2 because they are seeking to reduce the number of people on Medicaid, even though we are in a surplus at the State House. We have enough money they're still looking to save money, and they're looking to save money literally by killing people, because if you have 750 people that are currently on HIP Medicaid, they have determined, they did determine early on that what they would do was try to reduce that number to 500,000. If there's 750 on Medicaid, HIP Medicaid now, and it goes to 500,000, that's 250,000 that would be vulnerable. Originally in that bill as well, there was a 36-month limit on the number of months you could be on Medicaid. And so once again, you either had to get sick quick or die with what they had in that bill. The email that we sent out last week before a hearing that took place on Tuesday was one of the latest, greatest emails we've been fighting since the beginning of the session when we heard about this bill, to ensure that there was significant opposition that came not just from those of us in Marion County, but from all around the state. We have a community leadership board as a part of an academic study that we're doing that has been reaching out, as well as great support from and great work from Hoosier Action and Tracy Hutchings Getz and Adam Muller with the Indiana Justice Project. There's considerable opposition for Senate Bill number 2. We saw on this past Tuesday persons testified from our study, persons testified from Hoosier Action. We had a number of people that came to testify, but we billed it as a kill bill. And we got the word out for about a month, a little bit more, said that we need to call our representatives. We need to make sure that even before it crossed over, we were calling our senators down there at the State House to let them know that this bill will literally kill people. If you have people that are cancer victims and they're trying to recover, it does not happen fast. People have chronic conditions that last more than 3 years. And we still don't know how they anticipated knocking down the number from 750 to 500. Luckily, as we came to this hearing last Tuesday, those two aspects of the bill were amended out so that there is no longer a cap at 500,000 people, and also the 36-month limit was removed as well, effectively removing the caps and that which we had tagged as the kill portions of that bill. The bill did, however, pass after amendment and is now moving on to Ways and Means for fiscal consideration. There is a work requirement that's a part of Senate Bill 2 as well, so that this Medicaid reform, as they would call it, will require persons to work or volunteer in some way in order to be eligible for HIP Medicaid. It's expected that there'll be some consideration of that. It's also expected that with this supermajority, it will pass. But after that, there's going to have to be some type of litigation. There's a lawsuit right now in the federal courts. There's a stay on the power accounts for this HIP program that a federal judge in Washington, D.C. enacted. And it's expected that with this work requirement, there will also be some type of opposition to that work requirement. And so it has been altered because of advocacy, and there's further advocacy that we're going to have to institute in order to ensure that the most vulnerable among us receive health care, and that even while we see that the approach that this current government is taking in order to reduce the fiscal impact of Medicaid, that they are looking to reduce the role. But we've also written an economic impact statement that says that the best way for us to come at Medicaid is to get more people on this HIP Medicaid so our workforce is better. The HIP component of this HIP Medicaid that we're talking about, which is what is attacked in Senate Bill number 2, also has 90% of the bill coming, it's paid for by the federal government. The other 10% is paid for by a cigarette tax and by a hospital excise tax. And so 100% of HIP Medicaid does not come out of the general fund of the state, but it's paid for in other ways. And so it's just a good economic position for us to take to say, hey, let's get more people on HIP so we have a stronger workforce. And so there are a lot of caveats to it, but we continue to fight because we need to make sure that all Hoosiers, not just folk in our communities, but hospitals will shut down in rural areas. And there are more people on HIP that don't look like us than look like us. We don't understand that 41% of the babies that are born in Indiana are born on Medicaid. And so this is a program that impacts so many people. So we need to fight.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hicks, for that very, very concise and informative statement. I'm wondering, what is their motivation? Is it just saving money? Do they think there's fraud and abuse rampant among people in need? It just seems inhumane, their approach to these matters. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Hicks and Dr. Kelley?
Well, one thing that troubles me is that if we have people that go off of Medicaid, what are they going to do for coverage? They're going to end up going to the emergency, and which is much more expensive to have coverage at emergency than through a private doctor. And so that's what's going to happen. And there are many people now that still go to emergency as their main source of how they're going to get care. It's just kind of mean-spirited to me. We is there a concern about those who in need? Is there a concern about those who don't have the resources? And is it their fault that they don't have the resources? So, you said, what is the motivation? It's to make government smaller, but it's also making it crueler because there's not a care and a concern for people in need.
When they talk about small government, I always have to bring up this thing with vouchers, where they want to use, they're using millions and millions of dollars of taxpayer funds to pay for private school education. And that's big government. You want to reduce help to people in need, and people who have the money to pay for private education are getting money from taxpayers. So these are the kind of values that we're looking at. I'm sure it concerns you the way it concerns me. Let me ask you also, back to DEI for a moment. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a topic in our state. I know the governor, as Dr. Hicks indicated, signed executive order basically wanting to shut down initiatives under the assumption that unqualified people are going to come in and take away jobs from qualified people. And my opinion is quite the opposite. Is really, if you don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion among a qualified pool of people, all you have is privilege. All you have left is affinity bias, where you choose people based on characteristics, principally their race. And so we've all witnessed situations where people have been chosen by their merit, which is privilege, who are less qualified than people who would have come from a diverse background. If you don't have diversity, equity, and inclusion among a qualified pool of people, all you have is privilege. All you have left is affinity bias, where you choose people based on characteristics, principally their race. Is DEI in our state, is it over? I mean, is there any hope to convince people that it is not about elevating unqualified people over qualified people? Where are we in our state?
Well, there's been lots of testimony. In fact, last week there was testimony about Senate Bill 289, which is the diversity equity bill. And that particular bill, there was another one, 285. And so when they were debated in the Senate, They ended up, both of them passed, but they ended up over on the House side, and they have combined the two bills now. So we're just fighting the one bill that basically had the same descriptors in them. One was from a medical perspective, which really perplexed me. There was a doctor who testified that her son was an attorney. I mean, was a doctor, studying to be a doctor, and he had raised a subject, and someone had said, "Oh no, that's white privilege," and so he had been shut down. And so her concern was that she didn't want to hear anything more about white privilege, and that the quality of doctors that we were getting in the medical schools were not as high because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so our some of the senators on the panel that really challenged her, like Senator Greg Taylor and some of the other Democrats, uh, they could not answer the question, who are these people you're talking about, and what percentage are you talking about? And the question, their only concern was that their voices were not being heard because they were saying that they felt challenged by someone saying white privilege. And so when it was heard on the floor, there was it was a long discussion. So it's not over. It was heard on the floor, and it did pass out of the Senate after a contentious debate. And now it's on the House side, and there was lots of testimony that went a long time. So it's like people are hearing. There were more people who testified against the bill on the Senate side, but just a few people making their plea based on their emotions and their perspective weighed. It was like the vote was already ready. They had made up their mind before the bill even came to the vote.
Mhm.
So, and for this, the governor has already followed the same plan that our pre your
Hmm.
that the president followed with eliminating diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think one thing that's really concerning me is their whitewashing of history at this time. It goes not just from health and education, but now with the military, they're whitewashing who can be shown as heroes in history, or who did first things in history for the military. And it's just very disturbing. It's a time when if you're not grounded in knowing who you are, it can be troubling just watching the news. It's just very unsettling, not just for African Americans, but there are many other people that I know and I'm working with. They're just as troubled about it also. So their allies, everybody doesn't believe this. It's like a group has come in and they had an agenda, and they're working their agenda, and they're defying the courts, they're defying everything that we know. And it's just very troubling.
Over
You
the
share,
last,
let me share one thought on Dr. Kelly's point about the military. Let me post this right now. Look at this here. I found this today. The military was instructed to search keywords including first and history during rushed purge of Pentagon websites. And this has resulted in removing history about even, I mean, I've heard that there's some matters even concerning the Tuskegee Airmen being removed from history and many others. So to your point, Dr. Kelly, it really borders on insidious because it doesn't, what's the gain? What is there to gain from erasing and whitewashing history other than white supremacy? Let me just say that white supremacy is the only thing I see. Stacey Abrams, in fact, said this. There's a fear recognizing the changing demographics in the country, and that there is this big push now to essentially try to put systems in place for minority rule, recognizing that they won't be the majority forever. And so some of this maybe goes to trying to, marginalize everybody else. So I'll leave it at that. Dr. Hicks had a point you want to make.
So what one of the immediate things to follow up on what you've said, one of the immediate things that they did nationally was to take the Tuskegee Airmen out of the curriculum of West Point. Then as well, most recently, I think yesterday we heard that they were looking at Jackie Robinson and his role in the Army, and so you are exactly right that what we're looking at is the browning of America and the fear of the browning of America. So that you remember that in his first term, one of the first things that uh, that president did, I guess we called him 45, was to shut down uh, persons that were able to immigrate from uh, countries that were black and brown, but you could still come from Europe. The wall that is being built, even though people come from the north, the wall is being built on the south where they're brown people that are coming in. Uh, the gerrymandering, the redistricting that is taking place in state legislators in terms of the redrawing of lines in congressional districts, that is an old ploy, and it was once again to ensure that the voting power of black and brown people would be diluted. And so this is not necessarily contemporary, but it's an old play. It's an old plan. It's a plan larger than what we discovered in this election as Project 2025. It's a plan that has been in play for 50, 60 years. Some would say it's been in play since, what was that, January 1st, 1861, when the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect. You saw immediately a Reconstruction period where Black folk went to Congress, but then you saw the backlash to that. And I think that what we're seeing right now is very clear that we had a black president, but there's a backlash to that has taken place. And yeah, you have to call it what it is. There's a racist agenda that says that just as we fought this critical race theory over the last couple of years with this legislature, that was whitewashing, trying to make sure that their children did not feel uncomfortable by hearing about the past. But the effect of that is that you then have brown and black children that are suffering from disadvantage and are vulnerable, and our children won't understand why and where the lights were turned out on yesterday. They won't understand and may perhaps think that they are intrinsically inferior because of where they live and their zip code and the lack of resources that they have compared to what they see in other neighborhoods. And so this is by design that their children would benefit and not be felt to be uncomfortable, but also that there would be sort of a dumbing down of history so that one community's children can continue to prosper even though the country is browning every day.
Well, it's
Dr.
a
Kelly, let me turn to, go ahead, Dr. Kelly.
it's like a whitewashing of history,
Yes.
just taking everything out that's about African Americans and Hispanics or anyone else that is not considered the white European background. I know that in the past few years, we have, because of coalitions that have come together, have been able to successfully fight off some of the legislation that nowhere else in the country was there not an anti-CRT bill. Indiana was the only one that the last 2 years, that didn't have a bill that went through the legislation. And that was because of coalition building. So it showed us the power of when you work together with organizations and people who speak up and speak out strong. I believe the legislators had a conscience, and so bills weren't called or they didn't pass. And now it seems like people are emboldened to do what maybe was in their heart to do already. Um, and they're showing us what their true colors are.
Yes.
Uh,
Let me go to now, going back to our state legislature, Dr. Kelley, education. What legislation concerns you?
Well, right now we're looking at the legislation that's impacting Indianapolis, but even across the whole state. There's bills that the first bill wanted to dismantle or reorganize the Indianapolis public schools with 31,000 students. They wanted to say that 50% or more of the students that lived in the Indianapolis boundary did not attend the Indianapolis public schools, that those schools should be turned over, all of them become charter. And so the argument has been you just take 31,000 children and turn them loose to charter schools, which some of them have done okay, but not all of them. And in fact, they're performing about the same level as IPS schools are, except for a handful. And then IPS can match that handful with schools that are doing about the comparable. Um, so that would have been a terrible decision. There was another bill, 1501, and I was on a call today and found out that 1501, which wanted to take IPS's transportation and facilities and give them to make it so that IPS is responsible for everyone in the whole district, anyone that resides in there, the charter schools and everyone, they would take their transportation, and that we thought that bill was dead, but we're hearing rumors that parts of it are going to come back now and be placed in another bill. There's also a bill 518, Senate Bill 518, that wants to take property tax from districts and give part of the money to charter schools. And it wants to, any referendum money that those districts have, um, it would go to the charter schools. So in the past, there were four counties in the state that had to do that, and IPS was one of them. Gary District was one. And so we had township schools that had to pay money to charter schools when they had referendums. I was at a school board meeting for another not IPS, but another township school, and they were talking about the millions of dollars that are going out of their funding to support charter schools
Mm.
because of the referendum. But now 518 says every county will have to pay money from their budget into the charter schools. And so with 518, if that happens, well, actually, yeah, 518, IPS is going to have to close about 20 schools in order to stay afloat because of the money that's going to be going out of it. There's also, let me see. In fact, let me see where my notes are. Um, there's that's 1501, which didn't pass, but now it's there. It's a possibility it's going to come back, and the 518. There's also one about partisan um, school boards that you have to declare your party, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want to see politics entering into the school board.
Mm.
You shouldn't have to declare a party. That was heard yesterday, I think, or the day before, and it changed a little bit, um, and it says now that you can say I'm nonpartisan, but really it's getting at do you want to declare that you're a Republican or Democrat or independent?
Mm.
And there were two bills, one from each house. One of them said if you declared you were independent and you were on the board and you had to leave for some reason, resign from the board, then there would be a general election instead of the board actually appointing someone. So it was made it more complicated for the boards to continue
Mm.
working.
I'm going to propose a law that says you got to be a stakeholder in the thing you're talking about, right? I don't know much about the process. I have paid attention to some bills introduced, and I traced the person who introduced it, and they had nothing to do with Indianapolis, public
Right. That
education,
was
big cities.
1136, the one that wanted to dismantle the district. And a group of people did go talk to him, and he kind of backed off. But
Yeah.
it's like it's like a front. Okay, so we'll talk about this bill and we'll stop doing this, but there's other bills over here that do almost the same thing,
Mm.
like the DEI bill, Senate Bill 289. Well, the governor had already signed an executive order saying we're going to do away with DEI at the university level
Right.
and the K through 12 level.
Mm.
And so now bills support it and make it into law, whereas before it was an executive order, or it was I guess executive order is a little bit more than a suggestion,
Right.
but really didn't have the right to do this, but he did because he's following what the national
Yeah.
picture is.
It is so concerning to see what is often a lack of competence, certainly a lack of knowledge, surely a lack of engagement, with the very people that laws are being passed to affect. It just seems like that shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. People get elected, they're popular, and you can get elected whether you have core knowledge or not. So these are things we grapple with. Anyway, you know what? Our time is out. I wanted to keep this concise so people can watch the whole thing. But let me ask you for the closing statements, just what's on your heart right now. Again, I'm recording this on March 21st. I'm endeavor to have it out tomorrow, March 22nd. Okay, I want people to see this in close to real time as possible. So, Dr. Hicks, what are your final thoughts here?
Well, once again, thank you, Pastor Hudson, for the opportunity to share, and we encourage everyone to stay engaged. It's hard, and I know, even for advocates that do this consistently, to deal with the fire hose of executive orders and the blatantly heinous, evil legislation that we have to deal with en masse, right? And and so in the midst of that, I think that's a part of the strategy, that in the first 100 days of these administrations, that we would be so inundated with such terrible legislation and executive orders that are so hurtful that we would feel that we can't fight, but we can fight. And as Dr. Kelley has said, we have seen down through the years that coalition building, and sometimes even the power of one. Dr. Kelley created, along with the NAACP, a Black Academic Excellence Plan that we were able to take to senators, to the leadership down at the legislature, and say that this is the way that we actually have an opportunity to teach Black and brown children so that they are comfortable with, and they understand where they've come from and understand that there's greatness within them. That was counter to the critical race theory notion that wanted to whitewash everything. And so part of the panoply, the war chest of things that we brought to fight, we were able to bring data. We're able to bring that which is sensible in an environment where we see that sense is not always the order of the day. And so we're able to do that. We can stand up. And so if we continue to write and continue to make the phone calls and continue to send the text messages and continue to be engaged, we have seen that despite the fact that there's a supermajority and that people are bent on being cruel and following the direction, the spirit, and the attitude that is coming from Washington, D.C., we still have the ability to be impactful and effective and to provide the resistance and the opposition necessary to ensure that our people have the hope for tomorrow that we should still have. So thank you for
Well, thank you,
inviting me.
Dr. Ivan Douglas Hicks. Dr. Kelley, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's so many more things that we could talk about on this topic. Dr. Hicks and Dr. David Craig and Dr. Elaine Hernandez from IU have been involved in a study about HIP. There have been two studies, and this is the second one. And the Anthropological Institute has worked with a community leadership board from across the state from 5 different cities. And we have been able to get information from them about what they're doing um, with health in their communities. And also, we've had legislators that have talked to this group, and we've had experts about Senate Bill 1 that have been in communication with this statewide network. And so, networking is very, very important. I've also been in touch with some DEI leaders who have been doing programming and training in the school districts. And some of them are very disheartened because they've lost contracts. And it's like, what do we do now? Because this is what they did for a living. And yet they remain hopeful. One of the questions that was asked at the meeting that we had for healing and resilience for these leaders, some said that they were discouraged, some said hopeless, some said discouraged, some said afraid, some said angry. But then there were the people that did say hopeful, and that they're going to continue fighting because they know that what they're doing is the right thing. And the same thing with our health. We've got to continue to be sure that we're standing up for those who are without and making it known, even if this bill does pass, we're going to continue to fight to make sure that people without insurance have insurance. Is health a right for only people that have money, or is it the right for everyone? Is education and knowing who you are only for those that have the power? No, we have power, and we've got to use that power to make sure that our children and our community know that they are valued.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Hicks and Dr. Kelley. Again, I'm just supportive of whoever I can be supportive of and use whatever tools I have, which, of course, this is one of my tools, and I intend to keep doing this and even more so. It's just time to use whatever voice you have, whatever social capital you have, whatever you have, just bring it to the table and add it to what's already there to build the coalitions and support the coalitions that are being built. So thank you so much. I'm going to close this talk with a talk by Representative Joyce Beatty from the 3rd Congressional District of Ohio. Representative Beatty responded to a fellow congressperson who tried to lecture her on success and what improvement looks like. And so her 3-minute talk is classic. I believe this video has gone viral. I want to close this talk with you looking at these 3 minutes of Representative Joyce Beatty bringing a devastating rebuke to someone, her subcommittee, who dared to question her commitment to our country's success. So we will watch this in closing. And again, thank you, Dr. Kelley. Thank you, Dr. Hicks. And we'll do this again.
Thank you.
All right. God bless.
My colleague on the other side, Congresswoman Wagner, for using her time to actually read me the oversight plan. And for the record, let me just say, clearly I read it. And let me use my time to say that I read it. And that was one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that we protected diversity. Let me also give clarity based on her remarks and others that what this amendment is doing is asking to put diversity efforts and requirements back into what is already law, because it's in the Dodd-Frank Act. And secondly, words matter. I say that every day. And Mr. Chairman, I applaud you for the gift for me to chronologize and journal my journey here. And I'm going to dedicate this book to writing about DEI. Every time I come into this committee, I'm going to put you on notice. I don't care what the topic is. I'm going to put your districts on notice. I'm going to make this my commitment, because I get a card here that says to me that we're going to work on policies that will make our nation stronger. Well, this nation was built on slaves who gave their lives and built many of the buildings that they live in. This nation was built on women who breastfed your children and did other things. And you're going to send me a card to say, make our nation stronger, and then stand here and take exception to putting diversity and equity and inclusion? Why would you be so afraid? It doesn't eliminate anyone. We're not picking people who aren't scholarly. And then you're going to tell me to make freer capital markets? And then here's the last one to enter into the records. I want this document, Mr. Chairman, entered into the records, that we're going to offer more choices in people's personal pursuit of happiness on the same day this president of the United States is laying people off because they were qualified, but they happen to be of color. They happen to be female. Well, I'm going to tell you that is not acceptable to me. I'm going to say to you that I asked you to take a look at your districts. You took the same oath that I took. You took an oath of office to serve all of the people. We're not asking you to let someone keep their job because they're not qualified. If you look at the people who are in these jobs, they're being laid off. Some of these folks are making the difference in those departments. To give them lack of notice about their future and put this mark on their resume, how do they go look for another job and then explain? I did all this great stuff, but what am I supposed to say? But because my gender was what it is, I got removed. Look at this room and the people over here. You know, we got a vice president that got a black or brown wife. You know, so now when we look at talking about what we're standing for, I saw them little pretty brown black babies that they marched across here. So we're talking about our black and brown babies the same way. You are destroying the future of our children. It is genocide. And you're going to hear it repeatedly from me. Every day I hope I make you as uncomfortable as this makes me. And I yield back.
The gentlelady's time from Texas has expired.